There we go. First of all, I'm happy to talk at you for 2 hours, but I would be more happy to interact with you and to have a discussion and to answer questions and issues that might be on your mind, things that you're wondering about, things that you're curious about, rather than just stand up here and pontificate. But because I know that it takes a while to kind of get used to this and to get used to speaking in a room full of people, I'll pontificate for a few minutes. I am an attorney. Let me start by telling you the one attorney joke that I like that I think will help you understand what you can expect out of tonight. There was a man went up for a hot air balloon ride, and he got the captain to take him up, and they went up in the air. And as they got up to about 200 or 300 or 400 feet, it started getting cloudy, and then all of a sudden they couldn't see anything. And they stayed in the clouds for about an hour, and they were drifting along. And the pilot of the hot air balloon said, "I'd like to find out where we are, so I'm going to go back down and see if I can get some landmarks or something to figure out where we are." And so he keeps going down and down and down. When he gets down to about 75 feet, they're on this huge field. As far as you can see, from horizon to horizon, 360 degrees, is nothing but crops. And in the middle of that field, right underneath the hot air balloon, is a man working in the field, a farmer. And the pilot leans out over the edge of the hot air balloon and says, "Excuse me, sir." And the man looks up and says, "Yes, can I help you?" He goes, "Yes, you can. Can you tell me where we are?" And the man, without missing a beat, looks up at him and says, "Yes, I can. You're in a hot air balloon over my field." And the pilot puts the helium on and raises the balloon back up and gets back up in the clouds. And he goes, "Wow, that man was not just a farmer, he was a lawyer." And the passenger in the hot air balloon goes, "How do you know that? You talked to him for less than 30 seconds and you barely ask him anything." He goes, "Well, he has to be a lawyer because he was absolutely correct in his answer and he was absolutely no help at all." So my point here tonight is not to obfuscate everything. I hope to bring some clarity to these issues. I am here to talk about the transgender issue and how it affects the public schools because regardless of what you may be hearing or not hearing, it's going on in Utah. In fact, it's going on across the nation. It's going on in virtually every state where it's a weird phenomenon. You've got to separate this into two groups of people. There are transgender people who are sincerely transgender, and I have no issue with them at all. And in fact, if they're adults, I don't care what they do. If they're adults and want to have surgery, then God bless them. If they're adults and want to go on hormone treatments for the rest of their lives, God bless them. I don't care. I don't understand it, but I don't understand a lot of things in this world. So my approach is just, that's not something that concerns me. But when we start talking about our kids, it gets me pretty worked up. And there's a group of transgender activists, or really they're broader than that. It's the whole LGBTQIA plus community now that's out there that has made this their new cause celeb. And they've decided to take this battle to the public schools. And they're in the middle of waging war in the public schools on this ideology. This is not about what's best for transgender children, this ideology. This is about what's best for the ideology. And that's what makes me so angry about it. Because here's what I know. We know this from the scientific research. And let me grab another guide so I can wave it around. This book was written for superintendents, principals, teachers, and really for parents. And we are in the process of trying to get this in the hands of every school principal in America. There are 98,000 of them in the public schools. We're trying to get it in the hands of every school superintendent in America. There's 17,000 of them. It's about 60 pages long. It has 200 footnotes in it. The ACLU has a guide on this issue that's maybe 10 or 15 pages long and has 5 or 10, maybe 15 footnotes in it. It's not well researched. And the reason their ACLU's guide on transgender issues is not well researched is none of the research agrees with their premises. And so true to the ACLU's nature, they're going to get their word out the way they want it out. And if they don't have research, they just won't acknowledge it. The research is really clear on this issue. Trans gender dysphoric people, people who have genuine confusion over their gender. And if you're not transgender, and I would assume that everybody here tonight is not, it probably doesn't make any logical sense to you, because it doesn't make logical sense to me that you'd be confused about that. It's been straightforward since the beginning of time. We have men and we have women. We have boys and we have girls. Now, sometimes boys don't fit into the cultural norms of what a boy is, and girls don't fit into the cultural norms of what a girl is, but that doesn't mean they're not still a girl. It just means they're not fitting into the cultural norms, because what's expected of a boy in Utah is not the same that might be expected of a boy in New York. And it's certainly not the same of what would be expected of a boy in India, or a boy in China, or a boy in Africa, and the same with the girls. So there's a lot of this that's cultural. That's not, so it's, instead of saying we can't fit into these molds, we can't make this work, so I must be in the wrong body, we need to be saying, well, maybe some of our stereotypes are just wrong. What's wrong with a girl being really serious about athletics, even something like football? There's nothing, except it's just kind of, or auto racing. There's nothing wrong with it, except that our culture doesn't really quite understand it and doesn't accept it, but that doesn't make her any less a girl. What's wrong with a boy being into ballet? Nothing. I mean, as a kid, we would laugh at a boy that was into dancing and say, well, he must be gay, but that was our prejudice and that was our misunderstanding of who he was. It wasn't something wrong with him, that was something wrong with us. And as the culture has kind of adapted to those things, instead of assuming that because someone doesn't fit into the gender norms that a culture has, that so they must be in the wrong body, we need to start thinking about maybe some of our cultural norms are just not good definers of what a gender is. Instead of saying, well, if you don't feel comfortable as a boy, then you must be a girl, so let's start treating you like a girl. Let's start calling you a girl name. Let's start calling you by female pronouns. Let's let your hair grow out longer. Let's let you start wearing dresses, put on some makeup, and you start presenting yourself as a girl. It's called social transitioning, social affirmation. It's going on in the public schools right now all over America. Kids in the first, second, third, sixth, seventh, eighth grade are coming in saying, I don't think that I belong in the body that I'm in. I think I was born in the wrong body, and I'm a boy in a girl's body, and I want to be a boy. And instead of saying, well, let's look at that. Let's sit down. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what's best for you. Is that really your problem? Or are there other underlying issues? Because one of the things we know about gender dysphoria is it typically doesn't happen all by itself. There are usually other mental health issues that are out there. Could be depression, could be anxiety. It could be that your family is going through a horrible divorce. It could be there's abuse in the home. It could be that there's sexual abuse in the home. It could be all kinds of things going on other than the fact that you're a girl. It could be, we've got cases right now. We've got a case in Maine of a girl who has decided she is a boy. And she's at the school, and the school is affirming her, and they're running her through the paces. Maine has an anti-conversion therapy law. So all the counseling is always on the pro. Yes, you must be a boy. You must be a boy. We can fix that. Here's how we fix it. Let's start the process. You're too young for hormones, so we'll start socially affirming you. We'll get you ready for all of this. She's from a divorced home. She is convinced that her father doesn't like her because he doesn't like girls. Now, she lives with her father. She did up until recently. We got her back to her mother in a lawsuit, in a custody hearing. She's convinced, though, that because her father doesn't like her mother and her father's not, and he may have even said some things to her that left her to believe that he doesn't like girls. So she's decided that she's a boy because she wants her father's affections. Well, instead of affirming her and going, you must be right, she needs to be getting counseling for those things. We need to be talking to her about those issues, because becoming a boy is not going to change all of those feelings of not being loved, not being wanted that she's going through. And yet the whole ideology of the gender ideology movement is about, let's don't deal with all of those issues over here. We're only going to deal with the gender dysphoria. We're only going to drive this child through to help her become a boy, all the way through to surgery, all the way through to having a double mastectomy, all the way through to having reconstructive surgery to build her chest muscles to make it look more masculine and to make it more masculine. We're also going to give her a hysterectomy so that she won't have to go through a period and all of those things that she equates with being a girl, and she can become a boy. And we'll give her testosterone, because if we give her testosterone, that'll help her to grow hair on her face. It'll make her voice lower. It'll help her with muscular development. And then we don't bother to tell her that it's also going to thicken her blood. And it's going to cause her to have blood clots. It's going to cause her to be more susceptible to strokes, to heart attacks, to all of those issues that men face, partly because of testosterone. And any testosterone being injected into a woman is more testosterone than her body's built to accept. And if you inject too much testosterone into a man, guess what happens? The same things that happened to this girl. His blood thickens. If you start taking testosterone shots as a man, your doctor is going to insist on doing lab work on it every 3 months to make sure that your blood is not thickening up, that it's not clotting up too much, that it's not doing all the things that lead to heart attacks, strokes, and blood clots. Because that's what testosterone does. Yet our solution to a girl who thinks she's a boy is to say, inject yourself with testosterone. There's a girl that lives in my hometown. I'm from Rome, Georgia, about halfway between Atlanta and Chattanooga, in the northwest corner of Georgia. I live about 20 miles to the east of Alabama and about 60 miles south of Tennessee. And in that area, there's a girl who decided she was a boy. She was about 20 years old. She went to see not a doctor, but someone who in the medical profession who helped kids that felt like they were in the wrong body. On the first visit with him, without having talked to a counselor, without having talked to any of her other attending physicians, with no conversations, he said, okay, you think you're a boy? Well, here's a prescription for testosterone. Go get this filled and start taking your shots. And she says, well, I don't know how to take the shots. And he goes, well, the nurse outside will help you. She'll teach you how to take the shots. Just take this out there, tell her what we're doing, and go start taking your shots. And she goes, well, are you sure this works? Are you sure this is the right thing for me? He goes, look, I don't have time to talk to you about this. I've got other patients I've got to see. If you want to take the shots, take the shots. If you don't, then you need to go. So she goes out to see the nurse and says, I've got this prescription I'm going to get filled, but I'm not sure how to do the shots. The doctor said you would help me. And the nurse said, there's a video on YouTube, and gives her the YouTube address, said, watch this video. It'll teach you how to give yourself shots. That was their instruction, the medical community. Now, the guy was not a doctor. He was some kind of licensed practitioner. I found out I had diabetes when I was 23 years old. When I did, they said, you're going to have to go on shots. And the nurse sat me down and spent 2 or 3 hours working with me with an orange and a syringe. And I kept injecting water into an orange. And after about 2 hours, she said, well, your hand has finally stopped shaking. The first time I injected the orange, I literally broke the needle off before it went in because my hand was shaking so much, because I knew where this was headed. It was headed to me sticking this needle in me. And so I'm doing this. And after about 2 hours, she goes, well, I think your hands are calm enough. Let's try giving yourself a shot. And so suddenly it's like, well, I'm not sure they're calm enough or not. I said, look how steady I am, but I'm left-handed. So this is not good. And so I gave myself a shot in the nurse's presence and injected water into my skin. And it felt just like the orange. But they helped me with it. They didn't just go home and watch a video. Now, at the time, this was a long time ago, so they couldn't have told me to watch YouTube because I didn't even have a cell phone at the time. They didn't exist. In fact, fax machines didn't exist at this point. That's how long ago it was. But at any rate, they gave me some guidance. This girl went home and started taking the shots, watched the video, started taking the shots, gave herself the shots wrong. She was injecting them into the wrong part of her body and not deep enough into her body. And it created not only the thickening of her blood, but it created more problems in her body than even that. It causes brittleness of bones. There's a laundry list of side effects from a female taking excessive amounts of testosterone. It gave her a deeper voice, which she's now detransitioned. She's now decided that she really is a girl. And so she stopped taking the testosterone, that she's not growing hair on her face anymore, but her voice is still deep. Beautiful young girl. But because nobody was willing to talk to her about it, because they wanted to run her through a process, and they thought the best thing we can do is get her started on lifelong shots. You want to know what's behind this? You start taking testosterone to be a man, you're taking them till the day you die. If you want to continue to be a man, it's not like at some point you've got enough testosterone. Well, you reach the level, you're fine, because your body is working against this at every step of the way. It's doing everything it can to work against it. Your body's trying to create the estrogen. This also, because you're taking testosterone, it causes your uterus not to develop properly, your ovaries not to develop properly. It can leave you sterile if you started at too early an age. Obviously, a surgery is going to leave you sterile. You have a hysterectomy, you're sterile. You're never having children again for the rest of your life, yet we're encouraging kids to have surgeries. And we're doing it in our public schools. And I know that I can tell from your reaction that, one, it's kind of hard to believe, and two, it really makes you mad. And then if you dare to speak out against it, you must be transphobic. You're not showing love. Love says you can be anything you want to be. Remember, the Beatles told us all you need is love. We don't need anything else. We just need love. If we had, and Ringo tells you love and peace. And if we just had love and peace, the whole world would be fine. But now what's going on, and listen, I can live with all of that out in the world. If you're a parent and you want to bind to this ideology, I'm going to do everything I can to talk you out of it. But at the end of the day, I think parents have rights. We have rights. I have rights as parents to screw up my children any way I want to. And I've used that right to my advantage on quite a few occasions. I haven't done everything perfectly. I've done them as well as I could, but I didn't do them the way a lot of people thought they should be done. My parents have criticized the way I've raised my kids. My friends have criticized the way I've raised my kids. Everybody I know has criticized the way I raised my kids. And everybody I know now goes, man, how did you raise kids like this? They're amazing. And you want to go, by not listening to you. It was really hard. I had to ignore you. My father's a retired educator. My mother is too. We homeschooled my children. We started out of practicality. We were never ideologues. It wasn't a statement against the public schools. We would have probably sent our children to private school anyway. It was never a statement against the schools. It worked out that way. My wife was a teacher. I was a middle school teacher for a few years before I went to law school. And we just started doing it, and they enjoyed it. And every year, at the end of the year, she would go, what do you want to do next year? You want to go to school? And my son would go, no, I want to keep homeschooling. My daughter came along. She started homeschooling when she was 3 because she said, and my son, who was 7 years older than her, at 10, he would have been in the 3rd grade, the 4th grade. She was sitting in his class trying to learn to read while he was doing all his stuff. And so she just went along. Neither one of my kids ever attended a public school. And my father came to me when my son was he would have been in about this time, right after my daughter was born, I guess. And he goes, I really don't like you homeschool. Your kids are not getting the socialization they need. And I said, really? They're not getting the socialization they need? He goes, yeah. And that's what happens at public schools. And I said, well, Dad, you worked in the public schools for 30 years. Mom worked in the public schools for 30 years. So are you worried that my kids aren't learning profanity fast enough from the other kids in the class? Are you worried that my kids aren't getting pornography from the other kids in class? Are you worried that my kids aren't dealing with a bunch of broken families and a bunch of atheists who don't believe what exactly is the socialization that I'm missing with my children here? What exactly are you hoping that you really believe that that's a better place for them to be around a bunch of kids who aren't being raised the way I'm raising my kids? And he stopped, and God bless him. He stopped and looked at me and said, I've never thought of it like that. And from that day forward, whenever anybody criticized us for homeschooling, he jumped in and jumped on them. You don't know anything about it. You don't know what's going on. He became our fiercest ally because it took a reset of his mind. He just hadn't thought about it because he was raised in that world. He went to, listen, we've accepted socialized education. We're fighting over whether or not we're going to be a socialist country. We've already given in. We've got socialized education. And that's fine if parents engage. The problem we've had up until now is that parents aren't engaging in the education of their children. We turn them over to the schools. They're doing fine. They're great. They're teachers. We know all these teachers. I know the administrator. He goes to church with us. He's in our ward. Great guy. And maybe he is. Maybe he's not. Maybe he's not paying attention. Maybe he doesn't care as much about your child as you do. Listen, the greatest gift that we've been given as a country in the last 10 years is critical race theory. This is God's blessing on America for one reason and one reason alone. We all got so mad that we're not taking it anymore. We're no longer sitting back going, well, yeah, I went to that school in the 3rd grade and it was a good school back then. That was 20 years ago, but it was a good school. I'm sure it's still as good a school as it was. This is my neighborhood school. And suddenly they started outwardly talking about the social agenda and the social engineering that they're doing. It started back with Obama when he put out the order through the Department of Education that the bathrooms in the public schools had to allow transgender children to use the bathroom they identified with, or we're going to take your federal money back from you. Something that we learned when Trump was president, the federal government doesn't have the authority to do. When the federal budget is passed and the money is allocated according to what's written in the budget, the government can no longer take that money back. It belongs to wherever it was allocated. But Obama threatened to take it all. That means billions of dollars a year for every state in the nation. So states started going, so our local districts started going, well, we need to do something about this. What are we going to do about this? How are we going to fix this? Well, I guess we have to give in. We can't fight it. Then Trump comes along and undoes it. God bless him. And schools are still saying, we deal with a school in Atlanta. We sued them. We're in the middle of a lawsuit with them right now because a 5-year-old girl, this school has a policy, kindergarten through 12th grade, that children can use the bathroom of the sex they identify with. Kindergarten through 12th grade, district-wide, policy passed without the board having a public meeting, without the board having a public discussion, and the board had some emails that let them know about it. 5-year-old girl from a single family African-American home. The mother has been on and off on the verge of homelessness, has been homeless while the kids have lived in a car with the mother, 3 or 4 kids. So a troubled mother, fighting, doing the best she can. Her 5-year-old girl is in the classroom. They've already gone to the bathroom. She's in the room, says, I need to go to the bathroom. Can I go to the bathroom? The teacher says, sure, you can go to the bathroom. Another 5-year-old boy in the class stands up and goes, can I go to the bathroom? The teacher says, yeah, go ahead and go to the bathroom. Doesn't send anybody to supervise it. There are 2 adults in the room. They're not supposed to allow a child to go to the bathroom without supervision. Both of these children go to the bathroom without supervision. This child is known to be, the boy is known to be gender fluid, 5 years old. How do you know about that? That's not just, you're not coming up with this on your own. He goes into the bathroom. The girl's finished using the bathroom. She's wearing leggings. He physically assaults her with his hand in her pelvic region and penetrates her. The girl is embarrassed by the whole thing, goes back to the classroom, doesn't say anything. The next day, her mother notices she's scratching herself, asks her what's going on, and she finally tells her mother. Her mother goes to school and reports it, and the school decides that no such thing happened and reports the mother to the Department of Family and Children's Services because maybe the mother abused her child. She is from an African-American home in Atlanta, Georgia, and she is a homeless person some of the time. She's obviously got some issues. Maybe she did it. And the school does no investigation. And then when parents start asking about the incident that happened in the bathroom, they're told by school officials, we did a thorough investigation and found that this is all a rumor, that none of it happened. We're in the middle of a lawsuit with that school right now, and I hope we win millions of dollars from them. I hope we get every dime that their insurance carrier covers. I want to take it all out in front of the school and burn it and go, it wasn't about the money, it was about punishing you. But we won't, because this mother deserves a chance with her child, who now has a lifetime of counseling to go through from a mother who was abused as a child and has a lifetime of counseling to go through in her own issues. And we've got emails or text messages from DFACS going, well, you know, these families, they're just looking for a way to make money. These families. We don't know if they meant these homeless families or these black families. This is in a city district that's unusual because it's the county district is largely African-American. The city district is largely white. This is a city district, a black girl in a city district school, and there's known racism throughout the administration in this school. But if you ask anybody there about it, we don't know anything about it. Kind of like some conversations we've had today with different people around Utah. Oh yeah, that ain't happening here. There's none of that going on here. I just told your state legislators that were on a call with me that you can pass a law if you want to against critical race theory, and guess what? That isn't going to matter. What you need to do is appoint a committee, appoint some interns to pull every book being used in a school in Utah and have them go through the books looking for it, because it's all laced throughout there. It has been for years. This is not new. They just, under Biden, they decided to pull out all the stops and just go for broke. Instead of slowly doing this thing. Listen, critical race theory, if I were to ask you, how many of you think it's something that's been come up with in the last year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe 5 years? It's less than 5 years old, maybe 10 years old. They were talking about it at Harvard 40 years ago. Because what they do is they vet all these things through the Ivy League. God bless the Ivy League. Those people who are all better than us because they're smarter than us. And we know that because they're on all our institutions. And we know that because we've been told that they're much smarter than us. They must be smarter than us. They come from Boston. And this is where the revolution started. You know, you guys came all the way out here, risk everything when there was plenty of good living to be had back in Boston. So we're all part of the low end of the genetic pool. I'm getting myself in so much trouble. My boss is a Harvard Law graduate. So whatever you do, don't let Bernadette see this video. I'm just kidding, Bernadette. No, but the idea is they vetted it. And they've been bringing it about and putting it into the curriculum without even, they're not calling it critical race theory. Listen, is there systemic racism in America? Yes, there is. If you don't believe that, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but there is. But is that a reason to throw the country away? I can't use this example anymore because it's just past. But if you can go back and look at the opening ceremonies of the Tokyo Olympics, and if you can't, the next time the Olympics come on, you watch and see this. You want to see racism? Watch the Olympic teams, the countries, march out holding their flags. And watch the Chinese come out holding their flags. You know what you're going to see? You're going to see a bunch of Chinese people. You're not going to see any white faces. You're not going to see any black faces. There's nothing wrong with that. That's who lives in China. The Koreans come out. You're going to see a lot of Korean people. You're not going to see white people. You're not going to see very many black people. You're going to see Koreans. The African nations march out. You're going to see a few white people if you watch South Africa or some of the other countries in Africa that were heavily colonized, but you're mostly going to see black people. You watch the Europeans come out. Guess what happens when the German team comes out? It's mostly Germans. There's a few black people in there. When the Brits come out, it's white people, pasty white people. And guess what happens when America comes out? It's the whole world. It's the world. They're black people, they're yellow people, they're red people, they're brown people, they're white people. Don't tell me we've got a problem. We do have a problem, but we are the most racially diverse country in the history of the world. And in the midst of that, we have, until recently, the fewest racial issues of any country in the world. Listen, I know that there's issues. I've got black friends, and I've got black friends that make $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year. And I talked to them about getting pulled over by the police, and they said, as a black successful man in this country, driving a nice Lexus car, when I get pulled over by the police, I pull over to the side of the road, I let down every window in my car, and I put my hands on my steering wheel and I face forward and I don't speak until I'm spoken to for a traffic stop. And then when the officer says, sir, I need your driver's license, I go, officer, I'm going to take my right hand and I'm going to get my wallet out of my right hip pocket to get my driver's license. And usually at some point the officer's going, are you getting smart with me? And I'm going, no, sir, I'm just trying to stay safe. And then I get his permission, I pull out my wallet and we have a conversation and we're going about business. Now, and he says, all of my children, when they got 15 years old, I sat them down and we had to talk about how you deal with police when you get pulled over as a black person. You know what happens when I get pulled? I've been pulled over by the police about 5 or 6, 7, 8 times. When I went to apply for law school, you have to list everywhere you've ever lived, everywhere you've ever gone to school. You have to list every fact about your life that you know of, and omitting any fact that they can find is enough reason to disbar you 40 years later. You have to list all of your traffic tickets, any criminal activity you've had. So my cousin was the sheriff in the county we lived in, so I had him pull my criminal record, and it showed that I'd gotten 3 traffic tickets over a 15-year period. One at the beginning of the period, one in the middle of the period, and one at the end of that 15-year period. And all 3 of them were from the same state trooper. Now, I started getting paranoid at this point. This guy's after me. He's taking a long time getting around to it. But 3 tickets I'd had, but I've been pulled over a lot more than that because I'm typically nice to police officers. And I usually sit and nicely listen to the lecture of you've got precious cargo in your car and you're trying to kill your children and all the things they go there. You know, you make a projectile if you hit something going the speed you were going, Mr. Thornton. Yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. And they'll usually let you go. But and this is at night, I get pulled over, I roll down my window, I start digging through the glove box, looking for the documents that I know the officers at nighttime when he can't see in the car. And I'm over here bent down, digging through the glove box, looking for things, putting in. And he walks up to the window and I'm bent down. I don't think twice about it. That's systemic racism. That exists. The solution to that is not systemic racism of the other kind. It's not to swap who's being the racist. Somebody needs to pay the power bill.
It's just wondering if we're hearing.
So I'm not dealing with that issue, and I'm not saying that we can ignore it, but I am saying this, that we have more people of more backgrounds living closer than virtually any place on the planet, and we get along when we're not being stirred up by agitators better than anybody. Now, people tend to stick together. I don't spend a lot of time with black people. I have friends that I go out to lunch with, we'll go out to dinner, we'll do things, but we're 2 different cultures in a lot of ways, and I can live with that. And I understand that I've got issues on this, but the solution to this is not to go in and to teach my children that because they're white, they've got a problem, because guess what? My wife is full-blooded Lebanese. Her grandparents immigrated from Lebanon back around the turn of the last century, around 1900. So now my kids are half Caucasian, pure Caucasian, and half Arabic, Phoenician. Well, does that mean they have half white privilege? Or does the white privilege, is it so prevalent that it takes over the Lebanese heritage? I mean, you see the unintended consequences of all these arguments that we're having are really about nothing but to divide us. The whole point of what's going on is to get you mad at me and me mad at you and you mad at her and you mad at him and all of us bickering so they can do whatever they want to our country while we're not paying attention. And part of what they want to do while we're not paying attention is convince us that there's a lot more transgender kids than we know about and that we need to be giving them aggressive treatments. And the thing you're going to hear as a parent, first of all, there are school districts in this state that tell their teachers and their school administrators, don't tell the parents. They're not going to tell you. Hey, listen, your 3rd grade daughter came into school and says that she thinks she may be a boy. I think that's something a parent ought to know. But they're not going to tell you. And the reason they're not going to tell you is because they don't trust you to not harm your child if you find that out. They've told us that. I've been told that. by school officials. It's in their documents. In Tallahassee, Florida, in the shadow of Ron DeSantis's governor's mansion. It's the capital of Florida, where the super governor out of Florida lives. The school district in Tallahassee had a guideline on their website that in the question and answer section said, when we have a child that comes in and identifies as gender dysphoric, should we tell the parents? And the answer is written plainly, no, period. And the next sentence says, because the parents could cause more harm to this child than the issue they're dealing with. Because you know, you're going to be unreasonable and say something to this child like, really, baby, I don't think you're really a boy. Let's talk about this. Let's think through this. Because at the end of the day, if you have a child that spends 2 or 3 years or 6 months trying to convince you of this, you aren't going to give in, but you're also not just going to go, oh, grow up and grow out of this. You're going to say, well, we probably need to get you some help. And it doesn't need to be help that goes, oh, yes, let's start treating you like a boy immediately and start doing all the medical treatments. Let's start putting you on puberty blockers. Because that sounds like a great idea, doesn't it? Let's stop puberty from occurring. Let's stop your brain from developing properly. That's what happens in puberty. Let's stop your skeletal structure from fully developing, because that's what happens in puberty. Let's stop your bodily organs, your heart, your lungs from fully developing, because that's what happens in puberty. Let's stop your brain from fully developing, because that's what happens with the hormones that your body kicks out in puberty, whether it's estrogen or testosterone. Let's stop all of these things from happening, because that sounds like a good idea, so you can figure out what gender you are. Well, there's what, 80-something genders now, or 100 and something? I think Facebook has like 100 possibilities. I want to know this. If there really are this many genders, why, when I go to change my gender, do I only have 2 choices? If I can be 100 things, why can I only change to a girl? Actually, I only have 1 choice. I can't change my gender to a boy. I am one. I have 1 choice. I can become a girl. One of the ladies that makes the censorship discussions on Twitter identifies as a deer, D-E-E-R, the little white-tailed animal that we go out and hunt. She literally identifies, her gender is as a deer. And she's in charge of whether we get to say it on Twitter or not. We've got inmates running the asylum and bragging about it. I mean, this is Jack Nicholson in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and he was proud of the fact that he was in charge, and Nurse Ratched wasn't getting one up on him. I made the mistake of going to see that movie with my mother because it was R-rated and I was 14, and the theater was insistent that I wasn't going in without an adult supervisor. And true to the nature of going anywhere with my mother, we were 15 minutes late. And we walked into the most profane moment of the movie when Jack Nicholson used some words that I'd never heard. And I was a 14-year-old boy in private school. My mother is a Baptist lady. She goes to church on Sunday morning. She goes to church on Sunday night, and she's at church on Wednesday night. And if they want to have a dinner on Friday, she'll be there too. And she's sitting there, and I'm sitting next to her, and Jack Nicholson has let loose, and I'm going, oh, sweet Jesus, I'm in trouble now. And she kind of looks over at me, and so I never made the mistake of asking my mother to take me to another movie. I waited till I was 17 to go. But we've got the inmates in charge of the asylum now. Listen, there's so many bizarre things going on that it's hard to publicly stand up and talk about it. Remember the old, it wasn't a fable, but the Emperor's New Clothes? We're all old enough to remember that, right? Y'all heard that out in Utah? You know, the Emperor's naked, but one person going, oh, that's a beautiful outfit you got on today, sir. I love that one. I love what your tailor did. And, you know, there's one person going, well, wait a minute, the Emperor's naked. No, it's got on new clothes. Those are new clothes. And they convince themselves that the emperor is really well dressed while the emperor is completely naked. That's where we are. They convinced us that there's something wrong with us because we don't want to turn our children over to them on these issues. These are moral issues. They belong in the house. They don't belong in the school. It should be off limits in the school. But we've sat back and allowed the social engineering to go on in our schools because we didn't have time to get engaged. And this is not a criticism. I get it. We live in a world where we can't live with only one member of the family working. We live in a world where we're so exhausted by the end of the day by chasing our tails around through everything. And then we come home and watch television that leaves us more exhausted or presents the agenda to us as if it's normal. Listen, there are more gay characters on television than there are gay people in the real world. Every television program has an inordinate percentage of gay people. It's representing as if this is really, really normal. And I get it. We're supposed to treat it as normal, and I can live with that because I'm not responsible for your sin. You are. I'm not going to be held accountable to it. When I stand in front of God, he's not going to go, well, how did he do? He may go, he did really well. What was your problem? But he's not going to ask me to account for you. He's not going to ask you to account for me. So I don't care. But when we're dealing with it and it's being thrust at us at every turn we make, you watch a Target commercial. Target was the first to do this. They started putting gay men with kids in their commercials for a tenth of a second, just flipping through it. You almost couldn't see it. You had to see the commercial 4 or 5 times to go, whoa, 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 that was a gay couple. Then IKEA started doing it. And now it's in everything. Now, if you don't have it, you're violating some kind of public policy law. Well, you've got to present it as normal, and presenting it normal is you have to show it. You're not allowed to just show heterosexual people anymore. I mean, I don't know how we got so bogged down in all this. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I have never once introduced myself to a human being alive, even a gay person, by saying, hi, I'm Joel, I'm heterosexual. I've never done it. I've never seen the need for it. But every homosexual person you meet these days seems like they've got to start with that, and we've got to lead with that, and everything's got to be about that. And then when we don't just stand up and go, oh, yeah, you're right, that's good, God bless you, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. I'm not happy for them because it's a hard life, because you're going against nature. And we're not allowed to say that anymore. And now with this transgender issue, it's even worse because these are kids that are genuinely confused. They're born in the wrong bodies. Nature has made a mistake. God has made a mistake. Are you listening? That's what this is about. This is a theological argument. If God did not create us, then God is irrelevant. That's what evolution was about. Is evolution possible? Absolutely. If God wanted to take 15 billion years to make the earth, he's God. He can do it however he wants to. That's not my problem. I don't care. I'm happy for him to have done it that way. If he decided to do it that way, I personally believe he spent 6 days doing it. But it doesn't destroy my faith at all to believe that he did it in 15 billion years. But I still believe he's in charge. And if God didn't create man and woman, and only man and woman, then nothing else is true. Nothing else we believe is true. That's what this war is really about. And they're ideologues. They're going to win this war if we sit back and do nothing. Now, you don't fight fire with fire. I'm not saying that we go out there and we give them back the way they're giving us and we start calling them heterophobes or non-transphobes. You're a non-transphobe. You're scared of non-trans people. You're scared of me because I'm normal. We don't win it like that. We win it by working with these kids. We can't make kids the victims here. They're willing to make kids the victims. Their whole ideology makes kids a victim because guess what? At the end of this ideology, you've got adults who are sterile. They made a decision when maybe they were 12, maybe they were 17, that this is what they wanted to do. And at that time, nobody wants kids. You are a kid. You don't grow up going, well, some of us do, I guess, especially a lot of women. Boys don't grow up going, well, I just can't wait to get married and have 5 kids. That's going to be so much fun. We're thinking about playing football or basketball or fixing up a car. I saw a meme yesterday that said, it showed a wife and her husband in bed. And she was laying there going, I bet he's over there thinking about another woman. And he's laying on his side. He's turned away from her. And it shows his thoughts. And he's going, if a band of demons joined in, is that really a fair contest? Y'all got the reference, right? The Charlie Daniels song, Devil Went Down to Georgia. I mean, that's how simple we are, ladies. I hate to let y'all see behind the curtain. Y'all have been paranoid about the wrong things. I mean, that's how we think. But if we're not going to fight this by giving them back their own medicine, we're going to fight it by saying, first of all, I publicly declared, if you want to label me a transphobe, I'm happy. I'll wear the T-shirt. I wear a 4X, and I've told it. I do a radio program in my hometown every Friday, and it's a lot of fun because I don't think anybody listens, and I get to rant and rave for an hour, and there's no consequences to it. So it's a lot of fun. But I've told them on there, if anybody wants to print up a shirt that says transphobe, I'll wear a 4X and a T-shirt. I'll wear it on the air. We do a Facebook Live so you can see it. I'll wear it every week I'm on here because I'm at the point where I don't care. I'm not willing to sacrifice our kids. And it's not my kids. My kids are grown. My kids understand their identities. Probably a lot of our kids do too. But guess what? You leave them in the public schools long enough with this ideology being taught from kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, all around them on social media, on their televisions, on everything they're seeing, everything they're doing. People they trust are saying, it's okay. This is the way God made you and we can fix it. It'll all come out in the end. We can work it out. Even good kids get turned by that, especially kids that aren't fitting in. And they look up and they see suddenly, hey, that girl got celebrated because she declared she was a boy. I want to be celebrated. I must be a boy too. It's called social contagion. It's going on in our public schools right now. And it's going on in Utah right now. 25, 30 years ago, transgender kids were generally, about 80% of them were 4 to 6-year-old boys who believed they were girls. Makes sense. Around your mother all day. Your father, you see him after work. Maybe your father's a little bit gruff. Not much fun to be around, won't ever play with you. Your mother's doing everything you want. I wish I was like her. I must be a girl. You can follow the logic of it. 25 years ago, that was 80% of the transgender cases in the West, Western Europe and America, which is where this phenomenon largely exists, is in Western Europe and America, which shows you that it's not genetic and it's not biology. Today, 75% of transgender people claiming to be transgender, are teenage girls with no previous sign of being, they haven't grown up going, I think I'm a boy, I don't feel comfortable, I'm not happy. They're girls who have just hit puberty. And now this makes a lot of sense too. What happens when a boy hits puberty? Oh, look, my boy's becoming a man. He's got hair on his face. He's got hair on his chest. Look at those muscles. Boy, he's getting really well defined. Look at him. He's going to be a football player. He just hit puberty. Boy's getting deep. He's becoming a man. A girl hits it. Fathers run in the other room and hide, look to mothers and go, you might want to explain this to her. I don't want to hear about it. And we treat it like there's something wrong. Frankly, because we're scared of it. As men, we don't have any idea how you deal with all this. God bless you. I'm just trying to be honest. And I think I speak for everybody in the room. We want, it's not that we don't want to understand. We don't want to experience it, and we don't understand it. And so a girl is naturally not going to be comfortable with all of these things going on. And the boys are paying attention to her. They're either making fun of her because she's late to puberty, or they're making fun of her because she's early to puberty, or they're making fun of her because she's in the middle of puberty. Because teenage boys are the absolute wickedest people in the history of the planet. We are brutal. And so a girl's in the middle of that, and one of her friends says, well, I think I'm a boy, and that'll solve this because they'll get rid of all of these issues for me. They'll put hair on my face, which my dad really liked that when it happened to my brother. My voice will get deeper. He was proud of that. I won't have to deal with periods, which would be nice. And they're not thinking enough. Their cognitive skills aren't enough. We know this. Their cognitive skills aren't enough that they can think through, but if I do this, I may not be able to have children when I'm 25 years old. And yet we've got school officials and activists telling us, but you got to do what the children want. I saw, y'all remember the Family Circus cartoons? Those were big about the same time as all my other references. I'm older than most everybody in the room, which is fine, but so sometimes I'm worried my references go back too far. There's a Family Circus cartoon out that shows the little boy talking to his dad. Dad's sitting in the easy chair, and the little boy goes, "Dad, I want a beer." And the dad looks at the little boy and says, "Son, you're only 5. And he goes, "Dad, I want a cigarette." And he goes, "Son, you're only 5. Dad, I want to go out on a date." "Son, you're only 5. Dad, I think I'm a girl." "Son, you know best." And that's how we're treating this. But listen, it was a hard road to get here. We had to give everybody participation trophies for a generation to get them to a place where we decided that we couldn't afford to offend anybody. So we had to make everybody feel good. We had to affirm everybody. And now we're at a place where they're saying you have to affirm these kids because if you don't, they're going to kill themselves. Sweden is the most LGBTQIA plus affirming country in the world. Lock, stock, and barrel, they're in. The Swedes have embraced it, have endorsed it, have loved it, have built their culture on it. And some of the most ironic things are happening. The more that they try to do away with the differences between men and women, the more their men and their women separate out in the job skills along gender prejudices. In the midst of this perfect utopian society, most of their boys are going into the fields that boys go into in the West. The auto mechanics, the mathematics and that stuff. And the girls are going into the things, in fact, it's a higher percentage in Sweden than in the rest of the Western Europe and America.
You mean the biologically born girls?
The biological kids, according to gender, are separating in job choices and educational choices based on the preconceived notions of what those genders would do at a higher rate in Sweden than anywhere else in the West. And they've done everything they can to do away with the differences. Sweden is the only country that's done a long-term study on the side effects or the harmfulness of the transgender process, the puberty blockers, the hormones, and the surgeries. Because what you're going to be told as a parent, if this ever happens to one of your children, what you're going to be told is that, listen, you need to be careful with this and you need to watch what you do because you could cause your child to kill himself. I've had parents that were told this in front of their child by a teacher. Would you rather have a live son or a dead daughter? Because if you don't affirm your child, she's going to kill herself. And how are you going to feel then? And so they're afraid that you're going to cause your child to commit suicide because if you don't affirm, if we don't work to get through the gender dysphoria by affirming it and getting them to the other gender quickly enough, they're going to kill themselves. The only long-term study that's been done was done by the Swedes. The perfect place to do it. You know what they found out? That at the end, after like 10 years after the transition has occurred, because all of the studies that the experts that testified at your local legislators' hearings, all of those experts talked about how, well, the studies show that there's a great relief from all of the negative mental health issues when you affirm these children and you give them the hormones and all this, because there's a euphoric thing that happens when a girl has her breast removed and she's been wearing a chest binder for 2 or 3 years and she's literally caused her lungs to not function as well because she's been trying to keep her chest looking like a boy's because she feels like she's a boy. And when she finally goes through and gets the surgery and her chest looks like a boy, there's a euphoria that hits them that I finally made it, this is great. And they're on cloud 9. And the studies stopped there. The Swedes went ahead and went out 10 years. and said, at the end of 10 years, when all of this, you've done everything, you've done all the affirmations, at the end of 10 years, at best, they're just as likely to kill themselves as they were before you started affirming anything. At best, they're just as likely. At worst, they're more likely to kill themselves. In fact, they're 19 times more likely to kill themselves than other children who weren't affirmed, according to the only long-term study that exists. You'll be hard-pressed to find anybody that talks about this in a positive way that'll quote that study to you. In fact, the Swedes have gone back and looked at it, and the Swedes this summer have just put a moratorium on all gender affirmation treatments to minors. They do not allow hormone treatments, and they do not allow surgeries on minors. Finland has joined them in that, and also the UK. These are the countries that are leading the charge on this. And they're saying, we're stopping it for now. We need to look at this a little more closely. And yet none of that message is getting out in the public schools. And you've got there's a lot of well-meaning people. Then I get it. I paint with a very broad brush, and I understand that. And I speak in a lot of generalities. And as I started off with, both of my parents are retired teachers. My sister's a retired teacher. My wife taught for 10 years. I taught for 4.5 years. I'm very ingrained in the education world. I have a lot of respect for it. But I refuse to respect the social engineering that's going on. And it's got to stop, because these are our kids. And that's why I said that critical race theory is the greatest gift God could have given to this country, because it's got us all so worked up that we're suddenly going, I don't believe you anymore. We've been having school board meetings in Georgia with 400, 500, and 600 parents showing up. The meeting that I was showing you that picture of the meeting in Henry County today, that a lady that works with us is leading a group of parents in Henry County. They showed up and they wouldn't let but a third of the parents into the meeting room because of COVID restrictions. Nobody was required to wear a mask, but they had to spread out. And then they declared that because of COVID, they weren't going to allow any comments during the open comment period. There would be no open comment period of a public meeting of a board whose whole purpose in life is to find out what the public wants them to be doing. The media was there taking pictures of it. The people that weren't in the room started talking outside the room, and the board got so scared that they walked out of their own meeting. That's how much power we have as parents. How many of you have ever been to a school board meeting? Wow, I'm impressed. This must be the activist group. How many of you enjoyed the school board meeting you went to? They're the most boring meetings in the world. Local school board, state board meetings are glorious and they're very grand. But the local, they're the most boring meetings in the world. And nobody shows up to them. You want to change what your school board is doing? Get a group half this size. This half of the room shows up at a local school board meeting and is activated on one subject, and they're going to start listening to you. You fill up that room. In Pickens County, Georgia, superintendent decided to open up the bathroom to a girl who wanted to be a boy and didn't bother to tell anybody. He just changed the policy, announced to the teachers, and they changed it. The parents found out about it. This is in rural Georgia, mountainous region, a bunch of hillbillies, uneducated folk. 900 people showed up at the board meeting. I bet they hadn't had 900 people in the history of their board meetings show up, if you counted the board members at the meetings. And they got so fired up that the principal ended up losing his job, even though he reversed his policy. Now, I have to tell this story because this is the fun part of being a lawyer. I went to meet with the superintendent before he reversed his policy, and we were talking to him, and we asked him, well, why did you do this? Because it was obvious that this guy wasn't an activist. He probably had never thought about the transgender issue before this happened. And he said, well, I've gotten a bunch of letters from the ACLU saying they're going to sue me. And part of my job as a school superintendent is to keep the school from being sued, because that just wastes money. And I wanted to do everything I could to save the school money. So I was trying to avoid getting sued. And so I said, well, listen, let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to relieve you of an incredible pressure. I'm going to do you the biggest favor of your life, because here's my promise to you. if you leave this policy the way it is so that the ACLU is not going to sue you, I'm going to sue you. So now you're going to be sued either way. So why don't you make a decision based on what you think is best for these kids? I just freed you up to make a decision based on your own moral structure, and you no longer have to hide behind, I'm saving the school from a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. And you could see the relief on him. As hard as that is to imagine. Getting threatened with a lawsuit and going, well, thank God, this could be good news. That's kind of the fun part of the job, because people usually don't respond that well to the news that they're going to be sued. And he changed the policy. Now, it was too late for him because he made some critical mistakes. He lied in a board meeting on video. And he got some really bad advice from the Georgia lawyers that were helping him, because a lot of this stuff is coming from the lawyers that are representing your school boards, because there's probably 1 or 2 law firms in the state of Utah that represent virtually every school board in the state. And they probably have been gotten to by the activists, and they're probably giving them activist laws instead of telling them what the law really is, because the law is really in flux in this area. There's no real clear understanding of what the law is, because the federal courts haven't really got engaged. It's still working its way through the circuits, and there's bathroom cases where they've affirmed it, but there's not anything from the Supreme Court at this point. You've got the Title VII case last year where the Supreme Court said that if you're an employee, you can't be fired because you're transgender, but this does not apply to the schools, and it does not apply to restrooms. And the first thing the activists did is they went to the schools and said, this decision applies to the schools. The same logic on Title VII applies to Title IX. They came in and said those words. I've heard them. I've seen the videos of them telling the Georgia School Board Association, all of their school board members, telling them that. That's what this case stands for. And it doesn't. Listen, the ACLU has been doing this for a long time. In 1962, as you all know, the Supreme Court banned prayer from public schools, right? They said you can't pray in public schools, right? Everybody remembers that. You remember hearing about it. You remember, none of y'all were around for that. I wasn't around to read the opinion either, but we all know that that's what they said, but they didn't. All the Supreme Court said in 1962 was that the state of New York cannot write a prayer, recite the prayer with a school official over an intercom system that belongs to the school, and force every student in the school to stand up and bow their head during that prayer. That's all they said. And that was a good decision. I don't want the state saying my prayers. I don't want the state praying over my children. Because what happens when the state decides it's atheist? Or what happens when the state decides it's Muslim? What's fair for the goose is fair for the gander. What happens if the state decides it's Hong, which happened in Texas, and they were trying to pray some Vietnamese religious prayers over their school, saying, well, we have religious freedom to do that. I don't want any of that happening. But that didn't say you can't pray in school. It said you can't do this one thing. And the ACLU began an immediate disinformation campaign and announced that the Supreme Court had taken prayer out of the schools. And because there was no Christian voice around at the time to controvert it in the legal world, we just all assumed that they were telling us the truth, and we've all believed it to this day. That's why it's important for us to engage. That's why I'm thankful for critical race theory, because it's one bridge too far. You know what? You want to give my kids a participation trophy. I kind of like it because he came home happy. He had a trophy. It was kind of nice. It felt good to have my son feeling good about what he was doing too. I realized he wasn't the best football player, but he got a trophy, and that's good. It made him feel better about himself. They came off with these other things and these other ideas, and we were okay. But now they're going, oh, we're going to teach them that you're bad. Oh, and not only that, we're going to teach them that they're bad. And it has nothing to do with anything they've ever done. I mean, you want to talk about judging a book by its cover. We're judging the book by its wrapper. And that was a bridge too far. And as a result of that, we're now engaged in this transgender issue needs our voices. It needs us talking to our local school boards, talking to our local principals, getting this guide. We've got this guide here. And we will put this in the hands of any principal in the state of Utah at no cost. We'd like to have it hand delivered. Because if you mail it, it's going to get lost in the mail. It's going to get lost through a shuffle. Somebody's going to find it that doesn't like it and never give it to the right person. But if you would hand deliver these, I will get these to you to get to your principals, your superintendents, and your school board members all across the state of Utah. Because what we're trying to do is to say, let's bring some common sense into this. Let's bring science back into this. Let's bring medicine back into this. Yes?
So if their biggest fear isn't correct information, it's like, yeah, we can give them correct information. But if their biggest fear is being sued, what is actionable on our part for saying, okay, what are you teaching my kids? And stop here. Typically, the lawsuits that you've seen, how can we say this is what needs to happen in the school as far as the
with the critical race theory? It's hard on that issue because the court has been very clear that parents don't have a right to control the curriculum that's being taught on a day-to-day basis.
Well, the transgender. On
the transgender issue, I think that we can bring lawsuits on the bathroom issues. If your school changes how the bathroom's done, we can bring a lawsuit on that, or we can threaten a lawsuit. Frankly, most of these schools will cave with the threat of a lawsuit, and with someone coming in and giving them the right information, just going, that's not what the courts have said. That's not how this is done. We can do better than this. So on the bathroom issue, we can do that way. If they're affirming your child and not telling you about it, listen, in Massachusetts, we're filing a lawsuit on behalf of parents who the school fired the teacher for telling the parents that the child was transgender. We're suing on the parents' behalf for the school not telling them that their child was transgender. You know, in Utah, you have laws that require that information to be given to the parents. The second a school learns it, they're required by Utah law to pick up the phone and call you. Not decide, well, we don't think these people are going to do right. Hang on just a second, I'll get back. Yes.
So what about even the propaganda in the school, like with the signs?
You're going to have to deal with your local school boards on that. It's going to take some vigilance and it's going to take some work. It's not an easy road.
To stand on with that?
Yeah, you stand on information. We've got a lady that works with us that has compiled all of the pornography in the public school libraries. She was at the meeting tonight. And yeah, Noelle. Yeah. And Noelle stood up tonight in the Henry County board meeting and read pornography out loud to them at the board meeting. And didn't leave anything out. And said, oh, by the way, this is in a book I got out of this school library and named the school. You keep doing that. Listen, one of the big Atlanta television stations was there. They don't want that kind of publicity. And you know, the stations there hoping there were two Antifa protesters there trying to get everything riled up to try to get a bunch of people arrested, and they just ignored them and wouldn't take the bait from them. But you're going to deal with whether the media blasts it. So they had someone there recording the whole event for them too. So that if the media comes out with an improper, that's the beautiful thing about the world we live in today. With social media, you can get the word out really quickly that, hey, here's an actual video of what happened. Look at how they edited this to make it look like something it wasn't. And you can embarrass the television stations. But it's going to take some vigilance, and it's going to take some active work. Listen, it's not fun to go to a Tuesday night school board meeting and to sit through the whole meeting to get to a 3-minute public comment that as soon as you get going, they're telling you, well, your time is up, you need to sit down. And they treat you like a dog because you bother to show up and say something to them. But you get enough parents showing up at that. You get enough parents that are showing up at the school. Listen, a lot of school administrators are good Christian people. They just don't know what to do because they're being given bad advice. And so sit down and talk to your school principal. Sit down and talk to your teacher. And these shouldn't be hostile conversations. I don't believe we get anywhere by ratcheting it up. I believe that you catch a lot more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And so you come in and you're nice and you're reasonable until you're not nice and reasonable. But the getting from the nice and reasonable to the not nice and reasonable is a very long pathway. And so you work with them and 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 you get more parents involved. So that it's not just you. It's not just, oh, here come those two again. They're mad about something we did to their child. Great, I can't wait to hear this. But now you got 20. You're already experiencing that?
Yeah, well, I'm getting set
Yeah.
emotional upbringing. So relate that to SEL, for instance, which we know is corrupt, coming from Castle and all that stuff, and they're implementing it into our schools and intertwining it within the curriculum.
Right.
So we're trying to figure out how do you opt out, and they're like, well, you can't because it's worked into the curriculum.
You have to opt out of the whole class, and you can't do that. Yeah.
Upbringing. I guess we're just trying to.
No, that's a really hard place to be, and that's why I say that happens at the school board, because the school board has to approve that curriculum, and so.
Is
SEL the same thing as comprehensive?
No,
this is social emotional learning. It's the most twisted, bizarre stuff you've ever seen.
It's the same thing with these kids.
Listen, what happened to teaching our kids reading, writing, and arithmetic? I mean, obviously we weren't very good at it because we didn't spell arithmetic right. It was the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Yeah.
But at least our kids could add and they could read. And they understood what was going on around them. But now we're trying to teach them how to be social and how to live and how to be all of these things. We're social engineering so much crap in our schools that it's no wonder we don't have time between that and the standardized testing that the federal government is requiring. It's no wonder that we don't have time to teach our kids how to read and write. And we're falling all across the world. But the trouble with that is because it's so ingrained and you don't have the right to take them out of whole classes. Unless a sex ed class is a whole class, you can take them out of something like that. But there's only a few things you can do with that. The only way to solve that is to go to the board, and you can't. It can't be the two of you. Although if you're powerful enough, it can. My dad had the board member that represented us in the district my dad lived in. He would go see her every time he got mad about something. And so one time he went to see her and he goes, "Well, great, Bill. What are you mad about today?" And he said, "I'm sorry. What did you say?" And she goes, "I said, what are you mad about today? Why did you come to see me?" And he goes, "Well, if that's how you feel about it, I don't need to talk to you. You're a board member. You're supposed to be here to listen to my complaints. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to find somebody to run against you. And I'm going to be the treasurer of their campaign. And I'm going to campaign for them. And I'm going to take you out of your position. And you won't be a board member after the next election." And she goes, "Yeah, Bill, go do what you want to do." He went and found somebody to run. He was the treasurer of their campaign. And they beat her and put her out on her ear. All because she wasn't willing to go, "How can I help you today?" So imagine this. This is something that really matters. This isn't just you offended my dad. This is your kids. And so I think that it's time to have those conversations with the board. Here's what we expect as a community, but you got to have the community behind you. And that's where organizations like Brooke's organization can really help. You get the community. Listen, I was with the state school superintendent today, and that lady's a little worried about Brooke, because of the parents she represents. And so you start getting that kind of clout behind you, you show up at a school board and go, "Look, here's what we expect," and we're not kidding. We'll every one of you that's up for re-election in this next election, we will find somebody to run against you. And we will organize behind them, we'll get money behind them, we'll campaign for them, we'll put their signs up, and we'll tell everybody not to vote for you, and we'll do everything in our power to get rid of you. All we're asking is that you listen with an open mind and give us consideration for these are our kids. They don't belong to you. God gave them to me. And you can have them from me when you pry them out of my cold, dead hand. That's the approach we're going to have to take in a nice way. I mean, you don't ever start there, but I'm saying that's how you're approaching it with, these are my kids, and I can screw them up without your help, but I'm certainly not going to stand by and let you add to the screwing up that I'm doing. And so, but it's going to take organizing, getting more, and listen, this is hard because it's not any fun to go to this meeting and to give up a night every month. It's not any fun to talk to people who treat you like there's something wrong with you because maybe you don't have as much education as they had, or you don't have a good job that they have, or you didn't get elected to anything, or your kids aren't the quarterback of the football, whatever it is that they're holding against you. Because listen, school board, the school board is a very weird political position. It's the lowest in the food chain. It's a starting point for a lot of people, and it ought to not be, because these people are getting elected with no experience, a lot of times never even really running even a small business. And the first meeting they sit down, they're looking at a budget of billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars. There's so many zeros on these things that it's not real. And we're expecting them to make intelligent decisions with no information and no education towards it. So we've got to show up and demand more of them. And again, I know I'm asking a hard thing, but it's our kids. And I think at the end it's worth it. Yes, ma'am.
Well, my question goes way back to what you were talking about earlier with the transgender policies or it being against the law in Utah to not tell parents. Well, we have at least 2 school districts in Utah, Salt Lake City School District and Pierre County School District, that have this in their board policies that schools are not to tell the parents unless the child gives them permission.
Right.
So you might want to get on your board's website or your district website and start searching the policies and see what's in there for transgender and
this stuff is all hidden.
Policies.
None of this is easy to find. In Massachusetts, what started in Massachusetts, I'm going to sit down for a second, ease my back a little bit. In Massachusetts, this all started about a year before COVID. The parents were getting really worked up about the libraries. And they were getting worked up about the books in the library because they found out that there were a lot of inappropriate books in the library, in the elementary school library. Well, they started looking into it. They had a transgender librarian who was taking video of their children on the first day in the library and going, what pronouns do you want to use? What name do you prefer us to call you? How do you identify? Asking 6- and 7-year-old kids this on video and saving the videotape. She looked like Bill Nye, the science guy, in a really loud, wild suit with hair that I've seen pictures of her. If you saw this lady, you wouldn't go, this is just a nice little media specialist. You would go, this is an activist. She's since been fired. But she told them, and the school board told them, and the school superintendent told them, listen, you feel free to complain about the books. We have a process. You can ask us to take any book, to remove any book out of the library you want to. You just need to give us the name of the book, the author, and tell us what's wrong with the book. And we'll remove any book out of the library that you tell us to do after we go through a process. We'll run it through the process, an honest process. The parents said, great, we're ready to do that. When can we get in the library? And the school said, well, that's the school's library. Your parents aren't allowed in the library. So we'll remove any book you don't like, but you can't get in the library to see if there are any books you don't like. So you got to wait till your child checks it out and brings it home and decide you don't like it. In Georgia, the most checked out book in a lot of the public school, middle school libraries right now is 50 Shades of Grey. What is that doing in a public school library? The parents don't know it's there. No, I'm talking about hard copies. The parents don't know it's there, but every boy in the 8th grade knows that book's in the library and they've got their name on a list waiting to get it. But yet, when you start engaging.
To her point, the online databases, my first grader can access similar books through their online database so that she could get an ebook on a transgender love story if she wanted to.
Yeah. Oh, no, there's none of those in the libraries. I've been assured of that. I have it on good authority that those books are not in the Utah public school libraries. And that's the double speak.
I'll take a screenshot next time.
Okay. I'm serious. Listen, Noelle would love to have a copy of that screenshot because she is
the one who sent me to figure out Davis and sent me the link.
Yeah, Noelle is brilliant at this. She has gotten addicted to open records requests. She filed an open records request with Cobb County Schools, which is Marietta, Georgia, Smyrna, Georgia. It used to be the conservative bastion of Northwest Metro Atlanta. It's literally the Atlanta Braves, their new stadium right there at the top of the city is in Cobb County. They won't allow MARTA to move the trains into Cobb County. They won't pay for it because they don't want the inner city of Atlanta coming into Cobb County. And it's been portrayed as a racist thing and all this, but they just said, we don't, these people, they've literally destroyed some malls. Buckhead is being destroyed because MARTA stops in Buckhead and the street gangs all come up from downtown Atlanta and are literally killing people on the streets of Buckhead, where Elton John lives. those kind of areas in Atlanta. They're taking them over. Buckhead is so frustrated with it that they're creating their own police department because the Atlanta City Police Department won't do anything to help them. So Cobb County, she files an open records request and they send her back a notice that says, we'll be glad to do this. We estimate that it's going to take 698 hours, or it was probably more than that. And it'll only be a cost of $170,000 payable in advance. Just send a cashier's check and we'll start doing this work for you. That was a response to an open records request. She went back to them and said, no, there's no way. You got it. And they finally got it down to like $500 because we know we're just looking for a few emails. But they're doing everything they can to hide this stuff. That's what really makes me mad is they're telling you it doesn't exist. They're trying to find, every time your first grader, listen, go on with your first grader and look for it and take screenshots and take those to your board meeting and say, this is not acceptable. Because listen, Noel met with the state superintendent of Georgia who said, that I don't believe, I'm a constitutional conservative Christian. I don't believe in critical race theory and I'm not going to allow it in Georgia. We're not tolerating it. And she took him a whole bunch of stuff showing, 1, where it was going on, 2, where his department was working on it, and 3, where they'd intentionally not told him about it. And said, you might want to look into this. And he's done nothing about it. But when you sit down and talk to him, he's a nice guy. And he sounds like me. He just, I love this country. I love the Constitution, and I'm going to fight for what's right. And I love Jesus, and I'm not giving up. And I'm going to do I don't care what man says about me. I'm going to stand firm. And yet he's allowing this to go on because he's showing no leadership. Because it's hard to show leadership again. These people are mean. They don't take prisoners. They're treating. I mean, the first thing they do is call you a hater. You don't want your daughter to be a boy. You're a hater. What's wrong with you? There could be nothing greater in your life than for your daughter to decide she's born in the wrong body and she wants to be a boy. Why are you hating on that? I mean, that's their natural response. The activist. Again, I'm not talking about the average, everyday gay, transgender, bisexual person. But the activists, that's where they are on this. And we've sat back all these years and just let them kind of have their way and let them, I think it's just trying to give us some mood lighting. and so they're just, we've let them get away with it. And now we're starting to call their bluff on it. And listen, it's not going to be an easy thing because school boards are going to tell you it doesn't exist here. Noel has gone and Noel sat in the legislature in Georgia this year, trying to get them to change one word in a law to hold librarians in public schools liable if they knowingly allowed a child in the public school to check out a work of pornography, either online or in a physical copy. Wanted one word changed, and because it was going to cause librarians to give up their sovereign immunity, all of the alphabet soup of the organizations that oversee all these people in Georgia weren't willing to compromise on sovereign immunity. And they said, well, it's sovereign immunity. We never compromise on sovereign immunity. But what somebody needs to say is, okay, so you're telling me that sovereign immunity trumps our children looking at pornography? We're talking about knowingly. We're not talking about a librarian that has a kid check out a book and they're going, what? I didn't know that book was here. Let me have that book back. We're not doing that. Knowingly. And our legislature would not pass the bill. A bunch of cowards. Noel sat in front of the legislature and they said, we don't believe these are in the library. So she sat down with the books and read them to them, using some of the nastiest language that I wouldn't use in here to save my life. My mother would wash my mouth out with soap. And she read every word to them and said, that's what's in your schools. You need to think about passing this law. And they still took a pass on it. Republicans to the core. This is not about Republican and Democrat. This is about godly and ungodly. And this is about righteous and unrighteous. And this is about a culture war. And how, and culture war in the sense that we're battling for our culture, not that we're going to pick up guns and knives and everything else, but that are we willing to give up our culture? Are we willing to give up the sanity that we know is around us and give into the insanity and to say, oh, the emperor's new clothes look really good. this has got to be good for this child because she sincerely believes she's a boy. And we all know that our 6-year-olds don't lie. And so we've got to do everything we can to help her. So this book, I'll get back and do a little bit of a plug. If there's questions, I'm happy to take them. Yes.
Have you researched at all rapid onset gender dysphoria? It's
talked about in this book.
Is it?
Yeah, that's what we were talking about the phenomenon amongst girls. It's the rapid onset gender dysphoria happens when kids reach puberty. They've had no signs or no symptoms of being gay, no symptoms of being, I'm in the wrong body, I think I'm a boy. None of that has happened. They hit puberty, and somewhere in the first year or two of puberty, they decide they're a boy, and they radically decide they're a boy. And it's happening, like I said, 75% of it is girls, which is the opposite of what it used to be. It's happening in clusters too. There's a lot of social contagion going on with this. Because listen, social media is covered with all of this. YouTube, evil device. Instagram, evil device. There's a TikTok is an evil device. There's another one that I know of. Any of these things that are allowing these kids to watch videos, these kids are not watching good stuff because it's impossible to get anywhere without finding this stuff because the media companies are driving them to it. They've bought into all this. Listen, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, the homosexual community, the LGBTQ community came up with a plan for how we were going to take this culture and get our rights affirmed in this culture. They wrote a book about it that they're now desperately trying to buy back from used bookstores. They're literally going to used bookstores trying to buy this book back that laid out their entire plan, and they followed it to the T. And this is the end result of it, where if you label them as enemies, you treat them as there's something wrong with them, they're haters. You use really nice words like equity. Equity sounds really nice. Who doesn't want equity? How can you be against equity? It even physically sounds nice. How could you be against that? Until you start looking at what does it really mean? It means that we're going to even up the outcomes for everybody. Well, we all know that all you do with that is you dumb down everything. We want to make sure that everybody does well, so we'll make sure nobody does well. It's the old adage you see of I can't remember who it was, but somebody famous and important enough to be on a meme with his actual name at the bottom of it said, 100 years ago, we taught Greek and Latin in our public high schools. And today we're teaching remedial reading in our colleges, or remedial English in our colleges. I mean, I understand we don't need Greek and we don't need Latin necessarily, although I think that learning to think is a pretty critical thing. And we've gotten to the place where my son drives me nuts, and God bless him, I hope he doesn't ever hear this. He's incredibly brilliant. He just finished up at the university, at Kennesaw State University. I'm extremely proud of him. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met, and I've met some really smart people. And he knows how to find information better than anybody I know, and he can find valid research papers. But the thing that nobody taught him how to do while he was in college is how to evaluate it all and how to critically think through it. So he can spout out all of the stats, but you can't have an in-depth conversation with him because as soon as you start disagreeing with him, he starts to get a little bit upset. My wife goes, all right, don't upset him, calm down. I'm a lawyer, I like to argue, I argue for fun. I don't even care which side of the issue we're on. I had an argument one night with a good friend of mine over gun control that I took the position that we don't have a right to guns, we don't need guns, guns are stupid, I don't know why we have guns, and the government ought to take them all. And I had him so mad at the end of dinner that he was never going to talk to me again. And I was having fun. And we walked out of dinner and he looked at my wife and he goes, I can't believe you're married to this man. And she goes, Byron, he's yanking your chain. We've got 3 guns at home. And he looks at her and goes, he looks at me and goes, what? I said, Byron, I'm just messing with you, man. I thought we were having fun. So I like to argue with him, but you got to be careful how far you push him, because while he's got a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of information, he has a very narrow knowledge of some things. There's some things that he has more knowledge than I do. He's a political science major. He's brilliant in it. I don't agree with him with everything he believes, but I agree with him with how the theories work and all those things. And it's just incredible to listen to. But we've got a whole generation of kids that are being spoon-fed a bunch of garbage and aren't being spoon-fed the things that they need. And that's why we've got to take our schools back and say, look, listen, we can vote with our feet, and people in Utah are voting with their feet. Enrollment's down in Utah. Because people are saying, I've had enough, I'm going to homeschool. I'm not, listen, you let the bathroom issue get out of hand, which it will. It's going to, unless the courts step in and stop it. And I guarantee you, there are people who are going to say, there are people on both sides who are going to say, I'm not going to let my daughter be subjected to a boy in her bathroom in a public school. I'll teach him myself. And there are people who are going to say, I'm not going to let my son have to live with the fear of a girl in the bathroom and the accusations that can follow him. Because remember this, as soon as someone is accused of an inappropriate action, a boy is accused of an inappropriate action with a girl, he is done for life. There's no recovering from that. And it doesn't matter if he's 16 years old. And in the midst of all this, activists are telling us, let's take kids at the worst time of their life when their hormones are raging. We're having trouble keeping them off each other in the hallway. We've got PDA rules all over the place, and we can't get them to quit making out in the hallways. And we're going to put them in the bathroom, the one room where they're already getting in trouble when they're sex segregated. Because there's no supervision in the bathroom because it's a private place. Now let's add to that. I've got a girls' room that I'm allowing boys in. Do I send in a woman to monitor that room, or do I send in a man to monitor that room? Is a woman allowed to be in there if there's a boy in there using the bathroom who thinks he's a girl? Is that appropriate for that woman to be subjected to that? Or what about the transgender teacher? The man who believes he's a woman and he should be allowed to use the women's room. This is a case in America right now. Not only should he be allowed to use the women's room in the faculty lounge, sometimes he doesn't have time to go all the way to the faculty lounge. He just needs to use the girls' restroom that the students use because he's a woman. He's a trans woman. You know, one of the arguments, I came up with this today, and I'm going to keep repeating it because I think we need to start using it. You know, if you're really a woman, why do I have to call you a trans woman? Why do I have to put a descriptive term on your womanhood if you really can become a woman? Because nobody is, even the trans people aren't arguing, I'm a woman, they're arguing I'm a trans woman, and that means I'm a woman. It's like, well, no, it means you're a trans woman. You said it yourself. You told me you're a trans woman. And obviously the word trans means something. What does it mean? It means that I'm a man who's a woman. Right. So that means you're not a woman, because guess what? A woman is a woman, period. She's not a man who's a woman. She's a woman who's a woman. Anyway, I can chase rabbits all night if you need me to.
So 2 questions.
Okay.
I'll just ask them both now. One has to do with charter schools.
Okay.
And how they play into this. The second one is, and maybe you can confirm this for me, I've heard it said that pedophiles are now their own identity. And
they're working on it. They're working on it. The UK is working on it. Can you comment
on both of those?
Yeah. First of all, charter schools is simple. Charter schools are public schools. They're spending an awful lot of time trying to convince you they're not. But they're public schools with different rules. They've gotten a charter that allows them to live by a relaxing of some of the requirements of a regular public school, as long as they keep their achievements at a high level. But they're public schools. They're not exempt from any of this, any of these issues. They're great schools. I love charter schools. I think it's a great idea. And it's a good compromise to help salvage the public school system without surrendering everything to the private schools. So I think they're a great idea. We have a lot of them in Georgia. I worked with the charter school groups in Georgia when I was in the Department of Education there. And so it's a great thing, but they're still public schools, and everything we're talking about applies there, and it's going on there too. They're not exempt from it at all. As to the pedophilia, there's a movement amongst psychologists and psychiatrists in England who are now publicly saying that pedophiles are born that way and that there's no harm done to a child when having sex with an adult, emotionally, physically, or where there's no spiritual in this world they live in. So there's no harm done to them. Therefore, why should it be a crime? They should be rewarded for their love. Yeah, I know. And so, yeah, listen, you're going to add a P to the end of all this alphabet because they can't not, listen, they're struggling now to figure out what to do with the bisexuals. You notice they skipped them. We dealt with the lesbians and the gays, and we jumped over to the trans because the only way you can deal with the bisexuals is to do away with the polygamy laws.
Didn't California also put forth some kind of a legislation that, like, basically along those lines of pedophilia?
Well, what California did, it was really weird. You had to dig really deep to find this. California already had a law that said that if an adult has sex with a minor, as long as the adult is not more than 10 years older than the minor, while it may be a crime, they can't be placed on the sex registry for life. They can't be registered as a sex offender, which, as you know, is a really harsh thing. It's really hard to find a place to live because you can't live. The rules are so big that there's, you know, I've worked in juvenile court in Georgia for years, and I represented some sex offenders and to get their own children back because the law doesn't keep sex offenders from having their biological children because typically most sex offenders don't harm their own children, although that's not always true. But this guy had never harmed his own children, but he had the hardest time finding a place to live because everywhere he lived was within the boundaries of where he couldn't live. So California said, if you're a 14-year-old girl having sex with a 24-year-old man, while that may be a crime, we're not going to put you on the sex registry for life. And then what they did this year was they added that to homosexuality because it was only a heterosexual forgiveness. So homosexual men who were having a 24-year-old man having sex with a 14-year-old boy could be on the sex registry for the rest of his life. And so they equalized the law this year. They made a huge deal about it. And it looked worse than it was because they were actually just catching the gays up with the heterosexuals. It's a crazy thing that we're talking about it at all. I mean, it ought to be, we can solve this problem. We can castrate you. And we can do it today as soon as the jury comes back with their opinion, which they'll be back any minute. And, you know, I mean, we know there's solutions because the one thing we know is pedophilia is not curable. That once a person, it's the only psychological sexual issue that we have not figured a way to undo it in a human being. And so, you know, and I'm tongue in cheek with the castration thing, but the idea that we're going to ultimately, we're going down that slippery slope. It'll be here. And if you say that publicly right now in front of the LGBTQ community, they go, oh, you're crazy. We'd never go that far. That's not what this is about. This is about genuinely people really loving people, and love is blind to sex and everything else, blah, blah, blah. But when the time comes, they'll put the P on there.
We've already changed, all of us, including you, we're already going along with some of the language, and we've been saying gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
Not gender dysphoria, right? What was it called before that? It was a dysfunction. It was a mental disorder.
It's still actually considered a mental disorder in the medical guides. Yeah.
They're moving that language from, I can't think of what it was called before, but it was a dysfunction.
Yeah.
And now it's dysphoria, and now they're wanting to move it. And now what they're doing with pedophilia is they're moving it to, and they call it a MAP, minor attracted person.
Yeah.
And so what they'll do is they'll get away from pedophilia, so then we won't be talking about pedophiles, we'll be talking about a minor attracted person.
Yeah, we'll probably just call them M's when we put them in the alphabet.
M's, And so when they change the language, and you know, then it makes it more palatable to people that don't know, that aren't educated, and like our friends that aren't here tonight that we invited, because it's not going to happen in Utah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Because this stuff isn't being taught in Utah because it's being taught under different names. Right. That seem innocuous.
That's part of it. You're absolutely right.
Safe, and so they look at us like we're crazy. Yeah.
Well, let's hope that they add the M's in next, because I think that would probably get God really fired up. Because if you go to the LGBTQIAMs, it's the LGBTQ I am. And who does God says He is? I am. And now, God, I'm just letting you see how twisted my mind works. At that point, I think God is going to intervene and just go, I'm going to show you what I am. And I'm about to be done with you. Yes.
I have a question from online. I want to know, what is the name of the book you were talking about that they're trying to buy back?
LGBTQ.
I was afraid that you were going to ask that. I've tried to find a copy of it before they started putting it back, and it was like 60 or 70 bucks. I can find out.
Okay.
If Brooke, if you'll text me that, I know some people that can, and I've seen it, so I'll find it and get that answer back. It's because, yeah, if we could find a copy of it. But I tell you, a great book that you ought to buy is by Abigail Schreier, Shrier. She's out of Arizona, and she is a brilliant writer on this issue. She's written a book called Irresistible Damage, or Irreversible Damage. I'm sorry, Irreversible Damage. I think I've been saying it wrong all day. I've read the chapter on the schools. It's incredibly insightful, and it'll give you all the information you need to deal with your local school. And it's full of a lot of facts. It's well researched. I don't think she's a hardcore. She doesn't present herself as a hardcore believer either way. She just is someone that's looking at all the facts and bound and determined to get all the facts out. But it's well worth the read. There was a threat to have it. They tried to have it pulled off Amazon when it first came out because it was a very popular book when it first hit the market. And Amazon refused to take it off the market, to their credit. I went ahead and bought it then. I've just started reading it. I read chapter 4 because it was about schools. I've just started reading it from the beginning, but it's well worth your time. And you can get it on Amazon on a Kindle, or you can get it in a hard copy. So, yes.
Yeah, you mentioned the term dysphoria. I've heard it said, maybe you can clarify for me, that when receiving counseling, they have to be careful. They can't even, is it true they can't use that term? I don't know if it has to do with gays or if it also applies to gender. Is that something you've heard about before?
No, but what's happening with the counseling, like in Utah, you have laws against conversion therapy. And so you're only allowed to affirm kids who believe they're transgender if you're counseling them. So you're not allowed to talk to them about. The biggest problem with all of this, particularly with young people, is if you just deal with the gender confusion that's going on. You're not dealing with a lot of the underlying problems that are causing the psychological issues and the suicidal ideations and all of those things, which are anxiety and depression and autism, because suicide is much higher among autistic people. Bipolar, suicide is much higher amongst bipolar people. You add bipolar to transgender and you're increasing suicide rates. And if you don't ever deal with those, you deal with only the gender issue, you still got all these underlying issues that haven't been dealt with because we've been told if we change the gender and do it properly, that's going to solve everything. Now, all this other stuff is because of this, is what they're trying to tell us. Mm-hmm. And so counselors aren't allowed to work on these issues because those are the real underlying issues, but this issue is overcoming everything, the gender issue. And so we've got to get back to a place where we allow our counselors to counsel kids with what they need, not with a preconceived. It's like saying, okay, look, I want you to build a house for me, and I want you to build any house you want, but here's exactly what it has to look like. You can build this any way you want. That's what you were trained to do. You were trained to help this person become who they're supposed to be. And I want you to do that, and I want you to do it according to the dictates of your conscience and what you believe, but you can only do it this way. And that's what we're telling counselors. And there's a couple of lawsuits on that, and the lawsuits so far have been that counselors have constitutional rights as well, and that you can't compel speech. And when the government makes a regulation, or a government body makes a regulation that says you can't say these things, that's compelling speech. Or you have to say these things. You can only affirm children. That's compelling speech, and that's not allowed under the Constitution. Any other questions?
So what do we do with our children in schools if they start saying, hey, this was Sally, now it's Brian. You need to refer to him as a him, even though it was a her yesterday. What do you do? What are our children's rights in regards to First Amendment?
Yeah. Okay. They have constitutional rights. They can't be compelled to use pronouns. They can't be compelled to use another name. I think that's really a personal thing between you and your wife as to how you want to respond to it. If it were my kids, I might be inclined to go, if somebody came up to me, y'all know who Jordan Peterson is, the Canadian president. I'm in his camp, which his complaint was that he was told by law that he had to use certain pronouns. And he just said, I mean, to put it quite frankly in Jordan Peterson's language, he said, I'll be damned if I'm going to do it. And he said, and I'll go to jail for it. If you put me in jail, I'll go on a hunger strike and I'll die. I'm not going to be told what I have to say. If a student, however, comes up to me and says, I'd like you to refer to me this way. If it seems appropriate to me, then I do it because I have respect for that student and I have respect for them as a human being. So it's one thing if a child is asking, would you do this with me? If it were a friend of mine going, would you do that? It drives my daughter nuts because I call Caitlin Jenner Bruce Jenner. And she's actually given me a pass because she says, Caitlin is the only transgender adult that I think is disingenuous, so I don't mind you disrespecting her, which is kind of weird. But I'm like, okay, good, I'll take it. But Caitlin, Bruce Jenner, he can't compel me to call him Caitlin. If he comes up to me and asks me to call him Caitlin, I may well do that. But it's not because I believe he's Caitlin, but it's because I want to have respect for him. And it doesn't mean that I agree with him. It just means I'm willing to have respect. And I think that's part of living in a mutual culture like we do. And so my advice would be, one, that it's the dictates of your conscience that decide your daughter. So even I can't tell you how to do it. But if it were my child, I would probably counsel them to look. If they're just asking for it, show them some respect and do it. If you can remember it, if you forget it, don't worry about it. But don't drive yourself nuts. Oh, I forgot I called him a her today. Oh, what am I doing? Because I get confused on the cases. Like the 11th Circuit case, I keep going, and I finally stopped going, wait, okay, the kid's name is Drew Adams, so it's a boy. So he thought it was a girl, he thought she was a boy. And I always get confused on it. I could say, well, he was in the girl's bathroom, but she was in the boy's bathroom. And so it's really easy to get lost in that. So you need to be careful that they don't start condemning themselves if they can't get it right. But but if the school comes in and says you have to do this, they don't have the right to do that to your child. Your child's First Amendment rights are as strong in school as they are at home, as they are out on a public street. And the fact that they're a minor does not distinguish those rights at all. Yes.
Someone online asks, is that just school counselors or trained therapists too?
With what?
You were saying building a house, you can do it however you want, but you have to make it look.
I think this is for professional counselors. I don't think it's necessarily school therapists, but I haven't seen the law, so I don't.
Anyone. It's not law, it's a rule.
Okay, it's a rule if they're licensed. If they're a licensed therapist, then it's probably through the licensing organization.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay, so yes, it would apply to them if they're licensed. But that's the crazy world we live in, where this is all okay now, because we don't want to hurt these children, and yet by trying to help these children, we're hurting them. Yes.
Did you say it was in chapter 4 of the manual where it gives ideas for how teachers can respond?
Yeah, chapter 4.
Parents can respond to, if they say, I want you to call me this, and the teacher can say, well, if you have had your name legally changed, then I will call you that. Or if you have had that, your gender legally changed, then I'll call you that. But until then, I'm calling you by your birth name or what's on your registration.
Chapter 4, page 48. I think it's 48. Yeah, 48 is the communications. It's a short chapter, but it's about communicating as school administrators, teachers, principals, superintendents, all of that, and how to communicate with kids, parents, and the community that goes through all of that. Because we do believe that it needs to be a respectful conversation. We're adamant that there's no bullying allowed of anybody. We don't need special rules to protect transgender kids from bullying. We don't need to be letting kids bully. It doesn't matter if you're the star running back on the football team, you're not allowed to bully people. It's just the way we're going to live. We're not going to accept that and tolerate it from anybody. So we don't need special rules. We don't need hate crimes legislation on this. We just need to go, we're not going to allow it. And so we go through that here. There's also at the very end, there's a frequently asked questions. And then there's a glossary of terms and then appendix of the studies showing a majority of children desist from their gender dysphoria by adulthood if not submitted to gender transition treatments. So the reality is, if we do nothing to these kids, if we don't make a big deal out of it, if we don't make a big deal either way about it, and just leave them alone, 80 to 90% of them probably are going to decide that they're the sex that they are. They're going to stop the idea that if we quit leading them down the path. Most of them are going to get to the place that's more mentally healthy for them. And that's what's so crazy about this is we're pushing kids. Once they've declared that they've made a decision, we're pushing them in a direction that we know is going to cause them more anguish as life goes on. Instead of leaving them alone and saying, some of you, by the time you get to be 20 or 21, are still going to feel this way. And at that point, deal with it. You're an adult, do what you want to do. But until then, we can't help you along to make you feel better now, because the end result of that is most of you, by the time you're 20 or 21, are going to go, no, I'm good. This can be, listen, I get it. This can be an intimidating book, okay? Especially if you haven't ever read on these subjects. The best thing to do is open it. In the front cover is the table of contents. And this book is laid out so well that you can see what you want to know about, and you can go and read it by section instead of, I wouldn't necessarily read this as a book. It's a guide. So go and see what your issues are. See what can help you. What do I want to know about? Do I want to know about activism in schools or gender identity policies that affect all students, or do I want to know about Title IX? Do I want to know sports pass facts? Some of the differences between male and female bodies that are the difference. It's the reason that we have a phenomenon going on all over the world where men are becoming women and asking to compete in women's sports, but no women are becoming men and asking to compete in men's sports. I wonder why that is. Maybe it's because the bodies are different, and that's why we created women's sports, so that women could compete in a fair marketplace and have a fair share of the joy of participating in sports. I mean, if we had the sports all combined still, and we were playing women's and men's basketball together, what joy would there be for more than a couple of women? There may be 20 women in the country that could compete on a high school level with the boys basketball. What about the rest of them? Why can't we provide them their own place? And why are we now letting men creep over into that space? Doesn't make any sense. And that's going to be the ultimate end to all this. So, is that me? Am I done? You sure? I can go on forever.
Thank you.
Well, listen, I appreciate you coming. I know you took time away from a lot of stuff you could have been doing tonight that was probably a lot less intense than this. But I appreciate you coming. Brooke knows how to get in touch with me. We are prepared to help answer your legal questions, your issues as parents, as members of the community, as you're going out to boards, as you're dealing with your children. We're prepared to protect your children's rights legally. We do all that as a public interest law firm, which means we don't charge for the work that we do. We raise our money independently. So you're not going to get a $100,000 legal bill at the end of all this. And we're prepared to do whatever it takes. We're committed to helping the families of Utah. So anything we can do, we're happy to do. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. And if you have any questions, please get some guides. We have a whole box of them to bring to your schools, to other parents to show them. So we have another class in 2 weeks, our last one in the series about social emotional learning, which is very closely tied to CRT. Kelly will be presenting. We have another author presenting, and Lisa. So